Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Milensa Shonyende, and for the next 15-20 minutes, I'll focus on what constitutes a good training plan. So we've already heard about PEEPs, which is the assessment criteria for assessing applications, but I'm going to focus on the education segment. So we really need to think about the suitability of the proposed training to the needs of the project or fellowship, for example. The extent to which the proposed activities will support the development of you as the applicant, and then also thinking about the extent to which the training and development plan will also support your career aspirations. This is an extract of what makes an application excellent from one of the selection committees that I found on the NIHR website. But really what's important here is that it's just focusing the needs to be about you and demonstrating how you can align, for example, your weaknesses or challenges that you have to overcome to enable you to deliver your research. So great. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's a mix of people at different stages, but what's really important here is just thinking about where you need to start from. So firstly, what's important is if we can think about the quality and relevance of the academic training and development plan proposed. So the training that I guess you've proposed for your application or your project, for example, how suitable is it, and actually is it relevant to what it is that you're wanting to do for that duration? And then also in terms of thinking about the support and development of you as the applicant. So especially if you're affiliated to an organization, it's important because the funders will assess and support, the funders will assess the support that you will get depending on what it is that you need. So it's really important to think about this as well. And also what's also important about the training plan is also thinking about the future. So it's not just about stating the current training that you need for the proposed project, but actually thinking about where it will take you for future career aspirations and really documenting that in your training plan. So then really when we also think about getting it right, as I said, in terms of where your career is right now, so where you're coming from and where you're wanting to go. And it's just important to try and think about in terms of a step ladder, and this really needs to be central in terms of your training plan. So it needs to be tailored to you in terms of what your needs are and what the future is. And this needs to be at the front of your fellowship application. So this also then means that you then really need to describe what your current training needs are and give evidence in that sense. And also then demonstrate your career progression through a range of skills, which will benefit in terms of your career development. Another way to also think about what to include in your training plan is really in terms of bridging a gap, because when you're applying for your, say, for example, fellowship application, it's not that you know everything, but really you are indeed trying to communicate to the funders that there is a gap in terms of, for example, the knowledge and intellectual abilities that you're trying to bridge in terms of you being able to close this gap and actually deliver the project that you're trying to propose in your application. But also there might be a gap in terms of, you know, the engagement and influence and impact, and you also want to highlight this in your training plan. So, you know, you might include in there in terms of training needs that you might need in terms of dissemination, for an example, to a different type of audience that you may not necessarily have experience in speaking with. But also most importantly as well, in terms of your personal effectiveness as an individual. So really then trying to be self-aware in terms of what your skill gaps are. And then also, as I said previously, if you're affiliated to an organization, for example, there might be some research governance gaps in there, and you might need some training needs, which might then fit with the project or your training actually in terms of what you're interested in doing. So again, it's just I'm recognizing that there will be gaps that might need to be filled in, and it's just making that clear to the funders in terms of the gaps that are needed to be filled. This is a like a VITA research development framework, which is quite useful in terms of just helping you assess where your needs are in the different quadrants that we've looked at so far. And what's actually quite good with here is you can, you know, go ahead and reflect on these as an individual, but also discuss with your supervisors, for example, your colleagues, in terms of where the skill gaps are and that you might indeed need to focus on. What training and development can you undertake? And I've just broken these down into, say, 3 broad categories that can help you just to try and reframe them and try and understand the training needs that you need. So, for example, so training to undertake the project and to support your development as a future health or social, as a future health or research leader, for example. So again, thinking about the skills and knowledge, do you need to focus on some specialist skills that you need, or, research methodologies that you might need to focus on, for example? So again, it's just really thinking about that. Also, you might want to think about, your training needs as a future researcher. So again, as I said previously, in terms of highlighting your career trajectory. So where you're applying for a fellowship to start off with, but actually you're probably thinking about the future in terms of, say, like an advanced fellowship, for example. What training needs would you need for that? Are there other research groups that you'd like to, collaborate with in that sense? So that's also really important. And then also in terms of, being like a future leader. So if you are going to be leading on these projects, is there a lack in leadership and management skills that are required in that sense? And it's, it's really important to highlight these things and just, understand that it's okay if you're not yet equipped in that sense at this point in time. That is the element and the rationale for actually taking up the fellowship, so that then you can undergo the training for these things as well. So, are there any international collaborations that are going to be involved in that, or any research visits? All of that can be included in your training plan. Then just what your training needs. So most importantly, to justify. So it's not just about listing your training needs, but actually justifying why you need those and how they align with your research project. So for an example, if there's some patient and public involvement training, if there's some PPI element in your research project, but actually you don't have any training in that, it's worth to justify the rationale for that. For an example, what we also tend to see is applications which may, for example, have an element of systematic review, but actually if you haven't, done that before, then certainly list that you undertake a course in how you undertake a systematic review, or any other methodological approaches that you need to think about. But also, as I said, in terms of what your next research application will be. So again, just really thinking about what the future is and how this application will then lead you onto the next step. But justification is just really important as well. So even the external courses also play a role, so not just necessarily the ones that are offered in your own institution. Then in terms of addressing your needs as well. So for example, visits and collaborations. So when it comes to collaborations, so you might anticipate things like conferences, for example, networking, or even long-term relationships. But you may potentially maybe say have placements within your collaborations. But if you're not able to undertake placements, then there might be other placements, say within your area of residence, for example. But really also thinking about where the leading research unit is in your research area as well, and what you hope to gain from this visit. I think certainly collaboration is key, and it plays a role. The next element that you think about is your supervision or mentors. So again, the funders will assess your supervisory team that you're proposing in your research project, and the supervisory team that you select need to be just right, basically. So, are they an expert in your research area? Are they an expert in the research methods that you're proposing? Do they have expertise in supervising students? And actually, what is their track record and success? And the funders are also likely to look at the suitability of the expertise in terms of the individuals that you're proposing to supervise and support you on your fellowship. And then also, addressing your needs. So the supervision, as I said, is important. So again, highlighting how they'll support you. An indication, for an example, is if you indicate, say, a certain percentage of their time, you then have to try and be realistic in terms of, are you going to get the relevant input that you require from your supervisory team, in addition to their own workload as well. So just think about that support that you're going to have during that period. what's also interesting here is from the selection committee is if you don't have the required expertise in that, the research methods that you're proposing, then presumably this can probably be supplemented by the training needs and development program that I guess you'd find suitable to support you. It's also important to give milestones of when you plan on achieving certain training needs. So this is, obviously just a very simplified Gantt chart, but just to demonstrate the point here in terms of, if you're proposing that your fellowship is taking a certain number of years, when do you plan on actually taking those training needs? And actually in terms of your training needs, are there the training needs that you're undertaking, say, for example, just before you really need to implement that training need or shortly after? Again, this is really important because then again, it just shows that you have really thought about your career journey here. So you could set out your training plan, for example, year by year, or if you have, say, work streams or study phases, you could obviously set your Gantt chart by that. And in that sense, you could also highlight what your internal and external courses are. But again, it's just, for example, for each chosen course, again, just, see whether you can provide a paragraph of what skills it will give you and how relevant it is, and obviously how and when you undertake the course. Because I guess, again, you have to be really practical in terms of how it fits in the duration of your fellowship and the amount of money that you're obviously asking for as well. So just in a few more slides, this is an example of a successful doctorate application. So the aim of the research was to develop a web-based decision aid to support parents of a child with neuroblastoma, which has relapsed, who are making repeated treatment decisions over time. And this is a doctorate application. And what they're then proposing is essentially focusing on three main objectives. So the first one being undertaking a scoping review focused on multiple treatment decisions and decision-making. And then they'll follow this on with interviewing parents to understand what is important in making treatment decisions and how obviously these decisions change over time. And then finally develop a decision aid for parents who are making multiple treatment decisions over time. So there's actually like a gradual, clear-cut process in terms of what it is that the applicant here is trying to do. And in terms of this, then, so what training should the applicant consider to conduct this research? So some of the examples, for example, that they might want to consider is qualitative data analysis. So presumably this is coming up from, say, interviews with parents. So they may not necessarily have experience in qualitative side of things. So they might want to undergo some training around that. But even more so, how you then infer, information that you get from those analysis in terms of them helping them to create this decision aid. But also in terms of then thinking about post-fellowship, for example, they might think about doing feasibility studies. So again, they might recognize that they need training in that, but also say randomized controlled trials if they're doing it on a bigger study. And then other trainings, which I've already mentioned in my previous slides, which may complement this training fellowship. But again, it's just trying to identify that. Again, so I've already just mentioned this already as well. So here in this sense, there's a justification, the need for each course, and the skills that will be acquired as a result of completing it, and then how it aligns with the research objectives, but again, also the timing and the cost. And really, it's just about, putting it all together, just looking at all these different elements and how you progress with these over the years of the award. So again, it's a mix of formal courses and then experience-based learning as well, and making the most, again, obviously in addition to external organizations, but I guess also making the most of training offered by your organizations as well. But broadly speaking, it needs to be relevant to your development and the research environment. And then just, again, a message from, the committee members as well. So a thorough training and development plan is central to your application, and it should consider the range of skills you need to gain to progress to the next stage of your academic career. So not just the technical know-how. So just really thinking outside the box in terms of everything else that we've that we've covered here.